Hey friends, it's Just the Gems. I'm Brandon. I'm just standing here gearing up for one of my personal most anticipated sequels, specifically Trails Through Daybreak, and it got me thinking about sequels in general. It seems like at one time we tended to think of movie sequels as almost always being inferior to the original. That's not as much the case anymore because since everything is a sequel now, then if we thought that way, we'd hate everything. But I remember hearing discourse around movie sequels like, why does that need to exist? It's gonna ruin the original. But video games always tended to be seen differently. Sequels were anticipated. We got super excited by the prospect of a new entry in a series we love. When I saw Final Fantasy III on the shelf at Toys R Us, I didn't think, man, why'd they go and make a sequel to my favorite game? They're gonna ruin it. No, I slammed my allowance down on the counter so hard I broke every bone in my hand. So by and large, even though cynicism has crept into the gaming world quite a bit more than back in the old days, I still think we tend to see video game sequels as pretty much a guaranteed good thing. And for the most part, they are. Development is an ongoing process, and when a team finally releases a game into the wild, they have a chance to take feedback and use that feedback to make their next project better. But sometimes things go horribly wrong. So today we're going to look at 4 JRPG sequels that were so much better than their predecessors, and 4 that were actually worse. I hope you enjoy it. But before we start, would you mind liking the video if you like it and subscribing if you're not already? It helps the channel out so much. Anyway, thank you, and on to the list. The story of the Shadow Hearts series is really interesting, and that includes its actual origins. It begins with the PlayStation 1 game Koudelka, which is an incredibly cool combination of survival horror and JRPG with a great creepy vibe and with some motion captured story sequences that are frankly ahead of their time. The next game in the series is the one that gave it its name, Shadow Hearts on the PlayStation 2. I hesitate to say that Shadow Hearts is better than Koudelka. It's almost just too different to even really compare them on a gameplay level. Whereas Koudelka had a slow-paced, grid-based battle system, Shadow Hearts took a page from Super Mario RPG and introduced a standard turn-based setup that relied on timed button presses to keep things interesting. The story is sort of a continuation of Koudelka, or at the very least you see some Koudelka cameos, but the plot stands pretty well on its own. Its sequel, though, is a completely different situation. Shadow Hearts Covenant is a full-on evolution of the Shadow Hearts gameplay and a direct continuation of the Shadow Hearts story. While I would never say that the original Shadow Hearts was lacking in the gameplay or story departments, it absolutely pales in comparison to Covenant. The combat is better than ever with a whole bunch of new customizations you can make to the game's trademark Judgment Ring, which shows you when to press the action button in order to optimize your attacks. But beyond the gameplay, the biggest glow up is with the graphics and story presentation. Gone are the pre-rendered backdrops and boring text boxes. This game is packed with fully voiced and performed scenes to the point that I sometimes even forgot I was playing a PlayStation 2 RPG. It's like Final Fantasy X quality, but just with the complete opposite vibes. It's dark, but it's also got an off-the-wall sense of humor too. The characters are compelling, the music is fantastic, it's a ton of fun to play. If Shadow Hearts was a solid JRPG on the PS2, then Shadow Hearts Covenant is a PS2 masterpiece, and more people need to know about it. I'm all for developers experimenting. You have to take big swings if you want to hit a home run. But sometimes you swing so hard that you dislocate both your shoulders and end up writhing around on home plate while the opposing team kicks dirt in your face. That's what happened with Breath of Fire Dragon Quarter. See, Breath of Fire was originally a solid but somewhat unremarkable JRPG on the Super Nintendo, and while it had its fans, it wasn't changing anyone's life. Breath of Fire 2 came along and broke the mold, gave us a surprisingly deep and dark story for an SNES game, along with even better gameplay. And the series continued on its upward trajectory from there. Breath of Fire 3 and 4 on the PlayStation 1 are held in very high esteem among JRPG fans, and we all waited anxiously to see what Capcom would give us on the shiny new PlayStation 2. What they gave us was Breath of Fire Dragon Quarter. Look, I won't even say it's bad, per se. It's very, very strange. Like I said, they took a big swing with this. So the premise is you are, as usual, a quiet little dude named Ryu who can turn into a dragon. Only this time you're living in some vast underground world. You have to make your way to the surface, but there's a problem. You're on a time limit. Ryu's dragon powers are going to kill him, and every time he uses them, he speeds up his eventual demise. You might be thinking, a JRPG with a time limit? What is this, Atelier? To which I would respond, no, it's Breath of Fire Dragon Quarter. Weren't you listening? Basically, you're not going to make it to the end your first time around. It's not happening. You're going to run out of time, the game is going to end, and you're going to be sitting there thinking, what? What am I supposed to do? Well, what you're supposed to do is play through the game multiple times. Each new playthrough unlocks new story scenes that you weren't shown the previous time, which is supposed to enhance the experience and allow you to get the entire story. In practice, it's an exercise in tedium resistance, and I, like a bunch of other players, could not resist the tedium. If you'll pardon the detour, it sort of makes me think about Arrested Development. Are you familiar with that show? It was an early 2000s comedy on Fox. It ran for 3 amazing seasons, got canceled, and then came back on Netflix for a 4th season several years later. The 4th season was strange. It was broken up in weird ways, the story was told all out of order, the characters barely interacted with each other. It was odd, and it wasn't what most Arrested Development fans were looking for. But if you look at what Arrested Development Season 4 was actually doing, it's a pretty remarkable piece of comedic storytelling. It's different, but intentionally so, and there's a whole lot you can get out of a close watch. I bring up Arrested Development Season 4 because I sort of wonder if Dragon Quarter is a similar case. It was definitely not what we wanted at the time, but it's so different, so out there, that I kind of wonder if I'm missing something. If there's some secret genius to it that I haven't seen. Let me know down in the comments if you think there is, because I'd be more than happy to give this one another shot now that I'm 20 plus years older. I wouldn't have thought there was much you could improve upon with Blue Reflection. That's not to say that it was a perfect game, of course, but I loved what it was doing, and the only ways I could think to change it would make it essentially not a Blue Reflection game anymore. What I wanted more than anything was a game that recaptured the experience I had playing Blue Reflection. The chill vibes, the surprisingly intense battles, the pure atmosphere of it all. If you altered the gameplay in significant ways, would it even feel like a Blue Reflection game anymore? Well, Second Light came along and showed me that this team at Gust really knows what they're doing. Blue Reflection Second Light is a masterclass in iterative game design. These designers paid attention to how the original was received, thought critically about their own work, and turned out an experience that exceeds its predecessor in literally every way. The Blue Reflection series, in case you're not familiar, is basically Japanese Magical Girls, the JRPG. That sounds a bit reductive, but I think it's pretty accurate. Second Light in particular sees a bunch of girls finding themselves stranded on an island that inexplicably holds a high school and nothing else. They have to figure out why they were brought there and uncover what's keeping them there, all while working out their own deeply personal problems along the way. There are a ton of characters here compared to the original game's 3, and they each have incredibly distinctive and interesting personalities. Seriously, there's not a dud in the bunch. The gameplay isn't just more of the same, it's expanded so much that it's practically an entirely new system. It's truly the most active and frantic turn-based system I've ever played. In a basic sense, it takes some cues from Grandia, where characters and enemies are moving along a timeline, giving you opportunities to cancel opponents' attacks if you can time it right. But waiting longer to attack allows you to use higher level skills, so there's a ton of strategy involved too, and not like boring strategy, like edge of your seat strategy. As battles go on, your goal is to build up your combo meter, which multiplies your damage output as it gets higher. Enemies will try to hit you with attacks that will drain that combo meter, so knowing when to balance using a weaker attack to cancel an enemy's move versus when to let one particular girl power up enough to use a super strong skill is what it's all about. Add onto that the whole magical girl transformation thing, and you have one of the best battle systems in a modern JRPG, and that's not something I say lightly. Beyond that, there's so much more to the game, especially when compared to the original. For example, Since all the girls are stuck living at this high school, you can find materials and craft different facilities that can help you out by boosting your stats or just giving you places to hang out. And speaking of hanging out, there are so many scenes of pure character development in this game. You can spend time with any of the other girls in sort of bonding sequences, and there are a ton of side quests to get carried away with too. It's truly better than the original in every way. And the original was already a very, very good game. Oh boy, I feel like I'm betraying somebody. I don't even know who. Myself? Square Enix? I'm not trying to be a... Look, I'm just gonna say this and deal with the consequences. I have been a Chrono Cross apologist for more than 20 years. When people would gripe about the game's issues, I would always chime in with some positives. The music is spectacular, the graphics are some of the best the PlayStation 1 ever churned out, the battle system was innovative and deep. And I do genuinely believe all those things, especially the music. The soundtrack is goated. But sitting down to come up with this list of sequels that were better and sequels that were worse, I don't know how Chrono Cross goes anywhere else. Keep in mind, when I say Chrono Cross is worse than Chrono Trigger, I think what you might be hearing is Chrono Cross is a bad game. That's not what I'm saying at all. But held up against a classic like Chrono Trigger, I mean, what game really stands a fair chance? Here's the thing though. If I enjoyed Chrono Cross more than I do, I don't think I'd even bring it up, right? Like, this is my channel, my video, I can pick what games I talk about. If I loved Chrono Cross and didn't want to risk even slightly disparaging it, I could just say nothing. But the fact is, it's not as good a game as Chrono Trigger, and it's not even a game I particularly enjoy playing. Whew. That was kind of hard to actually say. But I think I feel good having said it. Chrono Cross is the follow-up to Chrono Trigger, obviously, and it takes place 20 years later in a previously unvisited corner of the world. The connections to Chrono Trigger are few, but significant, and with a game as beloved as Chrono Trigger is, that sort of loosely connected sequel is honestly probably the best way they could have gone. The gameplay is similar to games like Xenogears, where you have a certain number of stamina points and attacks that use different amounts of that stamina. One key difference though is that in Chrono Cross, you can push your stamina into the negatives if you want to go all out, with the consequences being that you won't be able to act again for a longer period of time. Really, there are some huge positives that Chrono Cross has going for it. Like I said, the music, first of all, duh. Yasunori Mitsuda at the height of his power, it's a masterpiece. The gameplay is actually super interesting too. It sort of represents an evolutionary dead end for JRPGs. It introduced a bunch of cool ideas that future JRPGs just didn't borrow. Ideas like largely eliminating the idea of grinding by limiting how many gains you can get in a given area, or letting you mix physical attacks with magic spells in a single turn, or giving you the ability to run with 100% certainty from almost every single battle, even boss battles, even the last boss. It's a truly fascinating game, one that I love talking about and thinking about. But the thing is, it's not a game I love playing. I've tried probably a dozen times over the years to replay Chrono Cross, most recently with the Radical Dreamers edition. And each time I get maybe 5 or 6 hours in and I stop. I think that shows I aspire to be the sort of person who loves Chrono Cross, who constantly defends it to the haters. And I'm far from a hater, and I will defend it to an extent. But I can't keep up the facade anymore. I'm not crazy about Chrono Cross as a whole. It's a fascinating work of art, and it carries a ton of emotional resonance for me because of what it represented to me as a teenager, but it's a hard game for me to legitimately recommend. Let me know if you disagree down below. Maybe you can talk me back into being a Chrono Cross fan. Final Fantasy VII Remake came out to my massively overinflated expectations, and yet somehow, it still managed to blow me away. This reinvention of the Final Fantasy VII story, one of my favorite in the entire series, was just really truly masterful. Kazushige Nojima has been living in this world for so long now, and he really makes it feel real. Small details that were glossed over in the original, a game made by many of the same key members, by the way, but with decades less experience. Well, those small details get to shine in this telling of the story. Some people might mourn the loss of the classic battle system, but I'm not one of them. I love turn-based games too, but I don't need them all to be turn-based. I'm good with some crazy over-the-top action too. And Final Fantasy VII Remake made the fights almost as flashy as the fights in Advent Children, a movie which, by the way, is still referenced by movie directors as an inspiration and high watermark for action. Like, we get to play that now. That's crazy to me. But anyway, long story short, Final Fantasy VII Remake blew me away, especially with that ending that promised the possibility of bigger changes to the OG story down the road. And then Final Fantasy VII Rebirth came along and somehow managed to impress me even more. It takes the tight and narrow experience of Remake and expands it to an entire freaking world, something that I never dreamed would have been possible. Seriously, back when Remake first came out, I thought a bit about what the next game would be like, and I thought, there's no way they can really do a convincingly big world. They're gonna have a lot of fades to black as the characters leave one town and arrive at the next or something. Like, I figured they would have to contrive some ways of getting us from point A to point B without showing us all the terrain in between, because it just wouldn't be feasible to make a world like that in a game like this. But these lunatics did it. And not only is the world big, but it's full of so many things to do. And these aren't just the super rote things you expect to find in an open world game. Like, sure, you climb some towers to reveal some points on a map, but every single tower you scale is a bit different, and some even require outside the box thinking to get up. And sure, you have to hunt some monsters, but each monster hunt has special requirements to complete in order to 100% them. And yeah, Chadley is still around, but I love Chadley, and I will not hear his name spoken in vain. We stand Chadley in this house. In Chadley we trust. The gameplay takes everything good about the original and makes it even better. In Remake, I really didn't switch characters much. I pretty much just played as Cloud the whole time. Yeah, I'm the guy that just picks Mario in Mario Kart 2, sue me. But Rebirth gives you a compelling gameplay reason to switch characters, as that's the best way to charge up in order to use the new combination attacks. It's a brilliant solution to the problem of players like me sticking with only one character, and I love that they took the time to come up with something like that. The one thing I'm afraid of is that with Rebirth, Square Enix has somehow raised my expectations so high that it will be literally impossible to satisfy me. Like, what if this game has ruined me for all future games? It keeps me up at night. Tales of Xillia struck me right away as one of the strongest entries in the broader Tales of series. There are plenty of ups and downs within a series like Tales, and I feel like there are a lot of games in it you could make an argument for not being as good as one of its predecessors. But I bring up Tales of Xillia because it's one of the few games in the overall series that has a direct sequel, Tales of Xillia 2. I should back up a bit and explain why I enjoyed Tales of Xillia so much, shouldn't I? For me, in a Tales of game, it's all about the characters. These games focus so much time and attention on their casts, and when a game has a really strong cast, I'm almost guaranteed to love it. And I love the cast of Tales of Xillia. It has a dual protagonist thing going on where you can choose either Jude or Milla. Milla is the incarnation of a living god, and Jude is, pretending to check my notes, a medical student. Needless to say, I went with Milla. But their dynamic is something I almost immediately fell in love with, and that's to say nothing of the rest of the cast, which is made up of some of my favorite characters in a Tales of game, period. So when I learned about Tales of Xillia 2 and how it would feature the return of the original cast, I mean, I was pumped. This meant I was going to get more story with these characters I loved. However, I was not prepared for Tales of Xillia 2. In Tales of Xillia 2, you play as a character named Luger. At first, the idea of playing as a new lead character didn't bother me. I'm fine with some new blood, bring him in. But here's the problem. The king of all problems. Luger is a silent protagonist. Yes, for some reason, a game in this series, a series whose greatest strength is in its rich characters and their complex inner worlds, we're given a silent protagonist for the first time. Luger is a blank slate, a cipher that we are naturally meant to impose ourselves upon. As I've said many, many times on this channel, I'm not into that. Now, at various points in the story, Booger has a couple of dialogue options he can choose. What's crazy to me, what's certifiably insane to me, is that the developers had these lines all voiced and then hid them behind New Game Plus. Yes, if you want to hear Sugar actually voicing his lines along with everyone else, you have to beat the game and play it again. But I barely got through it the first time. And to be honest, I cheated and downloaded someone's New Game Plus file so I could turn that feature on from the beginning. It was better than the alternative, but it did not make up for the fact that this character is empty and boring. Not only did Bandai Namco drop the ball with the main character, they also made some truly horrific choices with the cast of the original game, such that some of them are barely even recognizable in their personalities. Now, sure, there's a storyline reason for that, but it doesn't change the simple fact that the characters act differently, at least in some key cases. I think my distaste for this game is due in part to how excited I was at the prospect of getting to spend more time with these characters I love so much. I raised myself up to such great heights that I had a long way to fall when they pulled the rug out from under me. Your mileage may vary, of course, but for me, Tales of Xillia 2 is one adventure I will not be revisiting. I could be a little stinker and put the original Paper Mario on this list as one of the worst games. Look, I know there's a decent amount of love out there for the OG Paper Mario on the N64, but I was a kid coming off the high of Super Mario RPG and wanting more of that. And instead I was given some paper cutouts and told to shut up. It just did not appeal to me. Sure, it retained at least some of the addictive gameplay of Mario RPG, specifically the timed button presses to enhance your attacks, but it was a step back in pretty much every other way. Smaller parties, less interesting characters, more basic story. So when Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door came along, I did not have much faith that it would be for me. I couldn't have been more wrong. Thousand Year Door somehow made me forget my resentment that the original Mario RPG hadn't been followed up on. It stuck to the same formula as its predecessor, but it improved the experience in every way. The characters were still just your standard enemies with like hair tacked onto them or whatever, but they were so much more likable and interesting. The battle system still had that super satisfying time button press thing going for it, but now with the really cool addition of the crowd mechanics. See, when you're in a battle, it's all taking place on a stage, and in front of the stage is an audience watching your performance. By performing well, consistently nailing all your attacks, the audience will get fired up, which increases your star power and could even cause them to throw helpful items your way. It's a mechanic the Paper Mario series has revisited since, but this implementation of it is still my favorite. And while the story still isn't, great, it's significantly funnier to me than the original. The writing is so sharp and witty, and it's got actual laugh out loud moments, and I don't know if you recall the olden days of video games, but that didn't happen all that much, especially not intentionally. You might have laughed at All Your Base Are Belong to Us, but the developers didn't want you to laugh there. You get what I mean. Anyway, with the remake of Thousand Year Door out now, I'm hoping a ton of people pick it up and show Nintendo that we don't hate Mario RPGs. We just prefer them to be good. Between this and the Super Mario RPG remake, I'm hoping Nintendo gets the message. Takahashi, forgive me, for I am a sinner. I have to confess. I don't care for Xenosaga Episode 2. This one actually isn't as hard for me to say as Chrono Cross was, but it still feels wrong somehow. I'm the biggest Takahashi Xeno series stan out there. I celebrate the man's entire body of work. Except this one. Look, in order for you to fully understand my disappointment in Xenosaga Episode 2, you need to try and grasp the situation I was in when it released. I loved Xenogears as a teenager, and when Xenosaga Episode 1 came out and blew my mind, I truly believed I was in for the series of a lifetime. I loved the characters, I loved the subtle and not so subtle references to Xenogears, I even loved the combat. And the music, once again, Yasunori Mitsuda coming in hot, just another all-timer. So when Episode 1 ended on that cliffhanger, I was so ready for the story to continue. And it did, but it did so strangely. For one, someone at Bandai Namco made the decision to drastically change the character designs of all the characters. Gone was the adorable anime vibe the original game had, replaced with, I don't know what to call this, a more realistic approach? I guess, kind of. But it's not appealing. It doesn't look good. The battle system was replaced with something that only resembled the original, but introduced new elements that made combat a slog. Not only was it a slog, but it was hard. There comes a point in this game where the difficulty spikes so high so quickly that I legitimately thought for a while that I might not be able to finish it. And this was back before YouTube, so I couldn't just go watch a Let's Play of the ending. There was a real possibility that I might not get to the end of the story. That was a scary time. But I did the requisite grinding and forced my way through it. That's another thing. The combat was so unfun, but the only way to proceed was to immerse myself in the combat so I could get strong enough to do the combat. It was a nasty, vicious cycle. The story is still the story, at least. I mean, it's Xenosaga, and I love the story of Xenosaga. I will say that episode 2 is where things start to get really confusing, and that's saying a lot coming on the heels of episode 1. So it can be hard to follow, but it's still a rewarding plot for anyone who's willing to stick it out. Xenosaga episode 2 just really bummed me out, to be honest. I wanted so much more from it, at least on the gameplay front, and it really let me down. Fortunately, episode 3 came along and more or less improved on 2 in every way, so even though the series ended up being cut from 6 games down to just 3, at least it went out on a higher note. I can only hope that Takahashi gets a chance to revisit the series, maybe improve the gameplay, unify the art style, and give us the full Xenosaga experience he always intended. Well, that's it. What did you think? If you agree with my picks, I would love to hear it because that will help counteract the people who get really mad at my picks, so please drop a comment below. Once again, thank you so much for liking, for subscribing, for doing all the YouTube stuff. It means a ton. Anyway, until next time. Bye. I'm just sitting here gearing up for one of my most... Boy, we're off to a good start. So today we're going to look at... Dogs, just sit down. There's like they're running laps. What are they doing? What are you doing? You have nothing. There's nothing for you to chase. Of survival horror and JRPG with a great creepy vibe and some... That's too long of a sentence. It's a long sentence. Now I have to read the whole thing and not mess it up. Thank you. Which shows you when you press the vast underground world. You have to make your way to the surface, but what are they doing? Like, I don't want to yell at them for playing because they're just dogs having fun. But Dad's got to record a video. Dad's got work to do. It's dark, but it's also got an off the wall. It's going well. It's going so well.